Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic lights. And I really wanna know if I'll ever figure out where the road goes. Even if I'm falling down, I will keep on searching for my highs. You can say I lost my mind, I will keep on holding my head high, even if the sky is falling down.
All right, and good afternoon. Well, good afternoon where I'm at. What time is it where you're at, Stephani?
8:03 p.m.
Okay, so good, almost night where Stephanie's from. But I am so glad that you are joining us today for a live edition of Successfully Chaotic. We are into season 9, and today I am honored to have our guest, Stephani Pierce, on. We are going to be talking about a couple of things, but primarily I wanted to talk about your book. We got to know each other. We were kind of doing the pre-pod chat that I do, and I really loved the cookbook that you have, which is, helping people with all abilities be able to kind of dive into the love of cooking. And as many of my listeners and followers know, I do have a son that's autistic, and that's very close to my own heart. And I'm very passionate about that subject. So I really was excited to have Stephani come on and talk about that. Before we get started, though, I would like you to jump in and kind of introduce a little bit about yourself, and I guess tell people where you're calling from since they know it's 8 p.m.
Fantastic. Fair enough. I'm calling from France. I live in the south, in Montpellier. It's called. It's a funny little sort of college/beach town. Really fun place to live. I love it. Anyway, so a bit about my personal background. So like when I was a teenager, my mom got diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and that triggered me having to learn to cook for my family. And because she had a few different episodes, there was the whole thing, various inmate situation kind of thing, inpatient situation rather. So my learning how to cook out of necessity turned into an interest, a passion, and now it's like a full-blown obsession, which is fantastic. I love it. So backing up, a little bit. So when I was 21, I was studying psychology, and this is at the time when there were horrible budget cuts at our university because it was just that time in California, fine. And so it was a terrible experience. I was like, hang on a second, I'm suffering here when I could be thriving. And so I decided to go to culinary school instead. So I signed up my next semester. And then after my first semester, thinking, oh, well, I'm amazing at cooking, this is great, I decided I was going to go work in a food environment. And so I got hired to cook at a homeless shelter in San Francisco for my very first job in the kitchen. And then I went back to school a few years later. Before that, I worked in a few different restaurants in the San Francisco area. Like I worked in fine dining, I worked in neighborhood places, I did all kinds of random restaurant experiences. And then I went back to school to study communicative disorders, and then I wanted to work with people with disabilities of all kinds. That's a little bit about my background and how I kind of fell into this weird sort of hybrid of disability and food, and it comes together really nicely.
I love that. And I know, you mentioned kind of your own story on having to kind of jump in and learn how to cook. Was it more the feeling of not knowing what to do, of, not knowing where to start? What was that made you think, I really think that this would be, something that the world needs, is to have a cookbook like this? Is that kind of what your thought process was, or how did that work?
Well, it was, yes, the need to learn how to cook, but also the thing of it is I also have dyspraxia, which is this weird developmental disorder, and not super well known at this point, and it affects all kinds of different aspects of a person. Like for me personally, it's my speech. It's why I talk super fast, and I apologize for that in advance. That's just how I sound. I'm sorry, or not. It depends on how you look at things, And then I had difficulty with learning new skills, social anxiety. My sense of direction is appalling. People always tell me, never follow staff. And you will get lost miserably. It's great, So I'm going to get lost, you follow me every single time. But my speech has gotten much better over time. Google Maps became a thing, so I don't get lost often anymore. And it's definitely coming together nicely. So because of my own experience needing to know how to cook, and then wanting to become a chef, and then having this disability to contend with, which was not super simple. Because if you're working in a restaurant and you have a disability, it's not super easy at all. Just because it's very stressful in a restaurant. Like you're literally,
It's high pressure.
It's very
Yeah.
stressful. There's no such. I've never been more stressed out in my life than working on the line during Saturday night. It's been terrible. So it's a lot of pressure to be sure. Anywho, so the idea with this book came to be like it began as a book for beginners, and then I was like, wait a second, this is applicable to people with disabilities as well. Just because it was designed to be accessible for everybody. Like the idea was initially like very basic culinary jargon, and then step-by-step pictures, and that's sort of where I was at. And then I sort of took it one step further. I'm going to go into this a bit more, but being very intentional about the way that I could make it work for everybody, regardless of their ability.
And have you got any feedback from people on using the book, how it's improved their cooking journey, or like, because I always love to hear kind of that other side, like, oh, this person, used this and is now able to do XYZ. Have you been able to get any feedback like that?
Absolutely, yeah. Like I was talking about this particular project of mine to a director of a special needs school in the Bay Area in Marin. And it's like a very fancy, super bougie, like basically like people who are wealthy who can afford to send their kids to this very exclusive school, special needs kind of thing. And he saw the book and he was amazing. He was super amazing. It's great. So he actually gave it to like one of the classes to use together, like one of the more high functioning classes, because it is still a book. There's still words, of course. So a more high functioning class, and they use it together as a classroom to make different recipes, and it was very successful apparently. And then like a friend of mine purchased the book for her child actually, and that worked a treat. So that was another sort of demographic I hadn't even thought of, because I mean, kids are great. I don't know much about them, kind of thing. So I didn't really think about that as another audience for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And the name of your cookbook is The Picky Tongue, is that correct?
It's Picky Tongue Idiot Proof. That's my second book.
Okay. What's the other one called?
Picky Tongue the Cookbook, and that one is a very different ballgame. That's more to tell my story. Like that's like a culinary autobiography. So every single recipe it's a more complicated food than Idiot Proof for sure, because I mean it can be, honestly. And it how do I put it? It's like every single recipe has a small story about where it comes from, like in terms of my personal life. And it was a really fun experience. Like the photography in that book is by Erin Herb Cohen, and she's an amazing photographer based in Wisconsin now. I think she moved from Tel Aviv. That's where I was living when I did all the photos, etc., all the books. And so that book was like the photographs are very sort of sunny, light, very fresh, breath of fresh air, natural lighting. And then the books for Idiot Proof are a bit more intentional. Like they're a little bit darker, a bit sultrier, like particularly this sort of like one final artistic photograph. Like there's like, handcuffs and like a chess set and just like in the background, really interesting sort of
gives it some dimension. Yeah,
it's very cool. It has a lot more. It's like more interesting, I would say, for sure. I'm really happy with the way this came out. They're amazing.
I do want to kind of circle into just talking about inclusivity in the kitchen, because like you mentioned, you do work in a kitchen. And I've worked in restaurants. I actually own a coffee shop and cafe now. So I'm not a chef, but I do have, a little bit of an idea how kitchens run and how it goes. And you're right. It can be very stressful. It can go from completely calm and organized to just like complete chaos at the snap of a finger, just depending on who comes in. Right. So when you're talking about just special needs or, any type of disabilities, that can be a challenge when you're talking about that high level pressure or stress. What is your recommendation, just based on your own experience, on how, people that own your restaurants or manage restaurants can help with that, and also people that have disabilities can help kind of manage those stressful, tense situations?
Yeah, sure. Well, yes, many questions at once, which is really fun. I'm gonna sort of start with I'm gonna sort of take them all in answer, if that's okay with you. In terms of in general, I personally feel, and I've asked around to my chef friends, people who own restaurants, people who work in restaurants, and everybody's felt the same way. They don't oppose people with disabilities in the kitchen, not at all. They're all for it. Fantastic. However, there's a caveat of not knowing how to help them fit in, because where do you essentially fit somebody who, for example, epilepsy wouldn't be the best fit for most kitchens because of like the obnoxious light, the burns running around, and so on and so forth. But if you change that environment in the first place and make it a more healthful environment for everybody, so taking a breath, not running around so much, not letting the stress of the ticket machine getting to you, that makes a very big difference, for sure. And like as a sort of more basic point, like food is an essential part of the human existence. Like people have the right to learn to cook, and they should, because without food you don't survive. And you can live 3 days and then we're done, essentially.
Yeah.
So I really feel like there's this importance about like just access to culinary knowledge. Really a very, very important aspect of things.
No, I absolutely agree. And I know, as being someone, again, that's the mother of a special needs person, and then also the owner of businesses, that can be kind of a hard, I guess, thought process on how to have the business function the way that it needs to, and making sure that there are adaptations that people need to make sure that it is an inclusive workspace. And I think a lot of employers that's kind of on the forefront of their mind, like you mentioned, especially like in kitchens and stuff as well, on how do we make that happen, how do we bridge the gap. And I really love what you said about it should be a healthy environment for everyone, and doing a few things is going to benefit everyone. And I think that is something that, as we kind of continue down this road of really adapting workplaces to fit different abilities, that's something that kind of needs to be in the discussion process with, how to make this a better suitable environment for everyone. I want to talk about your cookbook again just for a minute. What was your creative process on adapting these recipes to accommodate different abilities? Were there some key considerations that you thought about? Because I was sitting and thinking about when you told me that you had this type of a cookbook, I was like, I wonder, what are the adaptations for that? Like, is it just the wording you use? Is it the steps you take? How does that work?
Well, it's many different things, actually. Like the idea with the step-by-step picture, that's such a crucial part, actually came from a friend of mine who's actually on here. Hey, Liz, love you. Who told me, yeah, book for beginners, people who can all use this book will make it super obvious. It's obvious, to everybody, not just, like a single individual kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was a humongous aspect of it. Just having really every single step, pick up your lemon, juice that lemon, grate your zest, whatever. Everything is very detailed like that. That's a crucial aspect, absolutely. And then the font is very important as well. I use a very big font, like the kind that you cannot misread, or it's too loopy or too whatever. Very, very intentional, very clear font. The vocabulary, everything is like the least cookbooky jargon you could possibly think of. Like it's literally like, say you're doing fish, like take your fish, place it on the sheet tray, take your olive oil, drizzle it over your fish, whatever. You cannot, like, it's not using the fancy culinary jargon at all. It's very like every single day person. Kids as well, as I mentioned previously, can use this book. People with Down syndrome can use this book. Autism, whatever. People can all use the book. It's really wonderful. And then I was also, I found that an important part of the book was also the section about knife cuts, because most cookbooks will have like julienne the onion. Well, what's a julienne? So I did a whole section on just knife cuts, like how to do them specifically, and then what it looks like, and so on and so forth. And then there's like sections on how to make spaghetti, different kinds of egg cookery. And then things are a bit more interesting, like, how to properly empty a pomegranate. That's not obvious for most people, in fact, not just people with disabilities. So very helpful sort of tidbits are scattered throughout the book. It's very cool.
Now, I think I love that you did that, first of all. I love the idea that, because I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know that I even know because I did not go to culinary school. It's funny. people that ask me now, like, did you go to culinary school? Because I have the cafe. I'm like, no, I did not. I grew up cooking. I have a big family. I've always cooked. The whole cafe thing was kind of an accident. That's a long story. But, it's kind of one of those things that, having access to something like this, I think is great as far as family cooking too. I know I was thinking, this type of a cookbook would be perfect for families who are wanting to cook together. So then regardless of abilities or, age, this is something that a family could get together and actually prepare a meal together. That's something that I think some families are hopping on board and doing again. It used to be something we all used to do, but
Right.
we kind of stepped away from that a little bit. And I have noticed that there are a lot more families kind of talking about this again, like, hey, what happened to these big family dinners we used to do, back in the day, that we need to kind of do that again. But the problem is a lot of the abilities are all over the place because some of these kids are teenagers now and have never cooked, and some adults have never cooked that I know of. So the abilities can be everywhere, regardless of, if they have a quote unquote disability or a different, ability, or, their age or whatever, just the fact that they've just never been taught how to do some of these things. And I think that, I don't know. I'd never thought about a cookbook like this until you mentioned it. And then all these light bulbs in my head went off. And I was like, that's really interesting and very much needed, which got me thinking about all kinds of things that need that same type of thought process, because, when you have a special needs kid, like my child, he's 14 now. And, when he was younger, he was kid, number 5. So by the time you have 5 kids, you think you've got this parenting thing down. You got it, right? You know what you're doing. And then he was a whole lot different of an experience. And so I had to kind of shift my thinking on parenting and how to teach him how to do certain things. And I couldn't do it the way that I did with my other children. And, I think it is important to kind of think about that. It's not that, he wasn't just as smart, actually, probably arguably smarter than my other kids even, but it was just that the way his brain processed things was different. So I had to change and I had to kind of adapt, which is hard, at my age, to be able to, because I had to relearn how to teach, right? I had to relearn how to do all these things in a different way to be able to explain them in a different way. And I think that's why it's so important for, you could think of employers or, aunts, uncles, grandparents, friends. It doesn't even have to be like your child or your friend's child or whoever it is. I think it's important to kind of think about like some of these things that we take for granted that we know how to do, that may not have been their experience on being able to learn those things. And, I love this idea. I really do. And I do want to ask again too, when you're thinking about teaching someone, cooking, regardless of ability, are there specific tools or gadgets that you recommend for simplifying the cooking process? And does that matter depending on like the different abilities or?
Well, okay, like I spent 3 years in London teaching adults with learning disabilities how to become chefs. So I taught all kinds of disabilities, like there was like autism, Down syndrome, epilepsy, left side brain damage, all kinds of various, abilities. And then with that came different physical skills, different cognitive abilities, different interests, different physical aptitudes, different communicative components as well, of course. But I'm not much of a person for gadgets, really. I mean, I would recommend some cut gloves if you want to avoid disasters, honestly, because no one wants to be bleeding all over the place. It's no fun. So maybe some cut gloves. Otherwise, just go, really,
Just simple.
I mean, like I always started small with them, and I'm still teaching today, I start quite small. So first, we make a salad. So this is how you learn, talk about different ingredients. You can talk about different seasonings, introduce spices if you're into that, or herbs in this case, more likely, honestly. So studying with that, and then working your way up into doing like a soup, because then you don't have to worry too much about how it's going to look. It's going to be pureed down, right? So you can literally just have some sloppy knife skill that you're learning with, and you just sort of work with that. And that way you learn how to use different kind of tools like a blender, or, learning how to control the heat source, super important, like learning the difference between a full-blown boil versus just a simmer. It's a crucial aspect of cooking. It's simple, but it's not obvious necessarily,
No, I like that idea.
Like, for example, like when I was in London, I had like different apprentices and I worked with them every single day for a year each. So like one person I worked with, he has Down syndrome, and I still say autism to this day. No one believes you, but I still say autism. It's one of those things, you know how it is. Come on. And he also had has selective mutism, and he was super adorable. Like, I love people with Down syndrome; they're amazing. They're so wonderful, really. And he was super cute, and he needed his hugs and his physical encouragement because he wasn't really much one for speech, because he just didn't really talk to me for the first 6 months. Like, maybe a couple words, hello, goodbye, and then we're done. Everything, all the communication was very much nonverbal. It was really interesting. Loved it. And even this person learned how to cook like a beast. At the end of his year program, he was making cakes and wonderful like Middle Eastern dishes was my thing at the time. So he was super into that. He just took on all this information without being able, or not without being able, but without choosing that he needed to be speaking. For example, it was really wonderful. And then I worked with somebody else who's memorable as well with autism, a more high functioning person, I would say, for sure. Quite verbal, for sure. He came in super into food anyway, so that was one less thing to contend with someone who's kind of hunched over, like, I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
It was none of that. None of that.
Yeah.
It was great. And he was really into baking, which I could do a bit at the time, but not as well as I do now. I've had a lot of practice since then, but he left his program, and he was better at baking than I was at the time, by a lot, actually, because he was the kind of person, is the kind of person rather, who's very into detail, which as somebody with dyspraxia, I struggled with. So like the restaurant, I'd be like, you're making the cake, you don't have the finicky little bits I can't do properly. You can do that. I'll do my thing over here on this side. I want to meet halfway. It's great,
Yeah.
And his whole thing was just to tell me, oh, I'm autistic, I don't want to do this, I can't do this. I've got dyspraxia, now you can get back to your station, and we're going to meet halfway, and that's that. And that was it. It was really fun and really great, and a really cool experience, to be sure.
Yeah, I love that. And in your experience of teaching people, did you find that they were able to almost, because did you mention the one guy that wasn't ever verbal the whole time he was in your class? And that got me thinking, do you feel that allowing them to learn how to cook, it allowed them another expression, because you mentioned nonverbal expression, and obviously there's lots of them, but I feel like, being able to create, these dishes and, pastries or cakes or whatever they're creating, they're able to express themselves in another manner. And did you see that becoming, a big part of how they were expressing themselves now?
Well, very much so, just because like what you can't necessarily do through words, you can do through food. Like, cooking is an art form like any other. Yes, science as well, but I still say mostly art, because I'm much more of an artsy person than a science person. That's just how I operate personally. Yeah. So definitely an art form. It's just like a painter on a canvas, a chef in a pot. It's not so different, really.
No, I can see that. And as far as the book goes, you've got the 2 books out. Is that the only books you have out right now?
Right now, yes. And then I'm working on a 3rd book right now, which is, I started it during Corona, and then I sort of left it for a year, and then now I'm sort of back at it at a snail's pace. Yeah. Normally I'm so on it, but this one is taking me a long time because I'm doing the photos myself as well, so it takes a bit longer. And it's slow food. It's called Pakistan Lockdown, and so it's just supposed to be a joke in poor taste. Like, it is proof also a joke in poor taste. I like jokes in poor taste. That's how I operate.
Yeah.
So it really is just this whole idea that food should be a long and not difficult, but heartfelt process to produce. That you can really take your time and take 3, 4, 7 hours to produce a meal, and it's going to be worth it. Even if you're eating for half an hour, whatever, that experience that you made producing your 7-hour dishes and sharing that with your family, your friends, whoever, your neighbor, I don't care, is magical. It is worth the effort. I don't care. It takes too long, whatever. It's amazing. It's so good.
I 100% agree with you. And I know, and I'm in the States, and I know you are from the States. And so I do have the question, living in France, I'm sure it's a different experience than here in the States, where it does seem to be much more rushed. And like I said, there is this like underground movement happening. And it's been happening since COVID, actually, that we realized that, hey, we're just moving too fast. Like things are just too quick, too fast. And we're missing out on, like you just said, these slow meals, this actually waiting to enjoy this. Like you wait all day. Like I can remember growing up and, my mom or my grandma or somebody, they would cook all day. We could smell it all day. And we would our mouth would water all day, just waiting for it to be done. And we don't do that as much as we used to. And, I think some of it is very much the environment, in the States, but where you're at in France, is it still that same rushed mentality or is it more laid back there?
It's so different. Like, to give you an example, most businesses where I live are closed between 12 and 2 because people are on lunch break, right? People, like, when they do go out for lunch, which is pretty often, like, you're there for an hour and a half on your lunch break, and no one will mess around with you. People will drink a glass of wine or two at lunch. People will have a 3-course meal at lunch. They're not scarfing down a sandwich in the corner. Like, they're really enjoying the time to be with their coworkers or whoever's around, to get to know them and enjoy a nice proper sit-down meal. And then they come back, they're refreshed, and they can work the whole 35 hours a week that people work in France because that's the law, because they don't mess around 45 hours a week like we do in the US, Yeah. It's very different. Like, there's this really nice quality of life that I'm really enjoying living here, actually, because before this I was living in Israel, where the standard is 45 hours a week of work, and it's even more Russian than the States, and it's madness overall, honestly. So I'm glad to be here. It's a breath of fresh air. Really a very nice place to be. I'm quite enjoying my life here.
Do you feel that your experience there with taking the longer lunches, really enjoying the meal, like all of that, do you see the positive attributes to mental health, and especially mental health with people that do have different abilities? Because obviously, that could be a little bit more of a challenge. But do you feel that, that laid back lifestyle is actually has positive effects on the mental health there?
No, absolutely. Like, people here are generally much happier than they are in the US. Like, like oftentimes, like, you're in a big city and people are kind of mugging walking down the street. They're upset about something. They're stressed out. They're hunched over. They don't feel good, And then here, people walk a bit slower. It's sunny most of the year. They're having a dandy old time of life. And people are just typically happier. It's amazing. And there is a supportive environment. Like, there's this quote unquote chain of restaurants that are all over France now. It's called Café Joyeux. It means happy cafe. It's very cute, I think. Anyway, her happiness cafe. Yeah. It's really cute. And it's kind of like how I was working in London with people with disabilities in the kitchen. Like, they hire people with disabilities on unlimited contracts, so they cannot get fired. It's impossible, or nearly. And so they hire people with disabilities to work with them, like alongside people that are neurotypical, for example. So they'll have like 1 or 2 neurotypical chefs in the kitchen, and then they'll have maybe 3 or 4 people with disabilities of various types working alongside them. And the servers also have disabilities. It's really nice that they're learning, and it's a very fun place to hang out. It's really nice. It's a very sort of telling aspect of what life is like in France. Like, you can have somebody with a disability waiting at your table, and it's not even a thing. Like, okay. You look different, you act different, whatever, who cares? It's awesome.
Now, what are some things that the culinary world, whether it's a small cafe or, a larger restaurant, what are some things, because I love that idea, what are some things that they could adopt to be able to make that successful, to be able to hire in, people that do have different abilities, and to be able to kind of make that, work with their current environment? I know you mentioned earlier about, lower lighting and less stress, and I think that those are really good points, but I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to add to that.
For me, the most important aspect really is just the knowledge. Like, what is a disability? What are some of the attributes of people with disability? What are some strengths, especially what are, I guess, not weaknesses per se, but just things to be aware of. And then just getting this massive idea behind people's heads that it's a person first, and then it's a disability. So you have to get to know that person, like, for their quirks, their sense of humor, their personalities, their likes, dislikes, whatever. It's this crucial aspect, and we forget about people with disabilities, that they're people first. We're people first, in fact, if I can say so. And it's very, very important, honestly, and it's forgotten so often.
Awesome. Well, I do want to let everyone know kind of where they can find your books, where they can kind of find out more about you. I don't know if you're everywhere as far as like social media and all that, But I would like to be able to leave them with somewhere to kind of be able to check out your books and, follow a little bit more about your journey. If you wanted to kind of get that out. And if the people are listening to this on the podcast platform, all of the links and stuff will be in the show notes below. Right now, I'm going to have her kind of shout it out live here.
Sure. So my books are on Amazon. So it's very simple. Picky Tongue Idiot Proof is the one for disabilities, and then Picky Tongue the Cookbook for my story. And then you can find me on Instagram at Picky Tongue Cooking. All one word, no dashes, underscores, whatever nonsense.
That's awesome. And I'm going to get the book. I'm excited about it. And I know, here I've been talking to my son. Like I said, he's 14 and he's going to be trained to be a barista here. And, I'm kind of, some of the questions I was asking also for myself because, again, we're in this part of the journey that it's like, okay, well, I've never had a child with autism, and he is higher functioning as well at this point in his journey. He wasn't like years ago in his journey, but he is now. And, I'm learning too, right? And so then I've also never trained him to be a barista. So I'm learning too, and I've never trained him to do these things. So I'm very interested in, getting the book myself and being able to kind of share that with him. And I encourage if you're listening right now and, you have a loved one or a friend, family member that, would enjoy this book, that you go to the link that's in the show notes and kind of check that out. Christmas is right around the corner. So this would make a great gift as well. So is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience before we hop off here?
Yeah, I would just say this as a general message. Like, to work with people with disabilities, all you really need is to have the good intention and just to be able to exercise patience and kindness, which are good life lessons anyway. So just jump on that. It's very important.
I love that. Perfect. I couldn't have ended this better. And thank you all for listening so much. If you are listening on your favorite podcast platform, please make sure you hit subscribe to never miss an episode, and check you all out next time.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights,